Hello and welcome to World Panorama, where we get you a complete roundup of all the biggest international news stories. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you. Let us start the program with this week's top stories. After more than a year of intense negotiations, United States, Canada and Mexico finalized new trade deal to replace NAFTA. New deal USMCA to take effect from January 2020. Trump heralds the agreement as truly historic. Russian S-400 Triumph missile system to be in India soon. Two nations formally ink the $5.2 billion deal. US says won't hurt allies. Long-range missile system to change the strategic balance in the subcontinent. Nearly 5 months since the parliamentary election, Iraq's new leadership elected. Parliament chooses Barham Salih as the new president. Adil Abdul Mahdi to be the country's prime minister. Both leaders seen as capable technocrats. And a week after Indonesia's quake and tsunami double disaster, needs remain acute. Foreign aid picks up for survivors as government struggles to overcome shortages of water, food, shelter and fuel. Death toll tops 1,500. Our top story this week, the United States, Canada and Mexico finalized a sweeping new trade deal to replace NAFTA this week, just hours before their 1st of October deadline. Now, the two most eye-catching changes to the deal could benefit car manufacturing workers from all the three nations and help spur investment. They also offer a win to laborers in Canada and Mexico. The deal is expected to take effect at around 1st of January 2020, and US President Donald Trump heralded the still-to-be ratified agreement as truly historic.
North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA rewritten, presented with a new brand name, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement or USMCA. The US and Canada this week struck a deal to revise the NAFTA, allowing for Canada to join a pact hammered out in August between the US and Mexico. The deal came after weeks of tense talks to update the 1994 NAFTA and is aimed at bringing more jobs into the United States, with Canada and Mexico accepting more restrictive commerce with the United States, their main export customer. Trump called it the most modern, up-to-date and balanced trade agreement in US history.
So we have negotiated this new agreement based on the principle of fairness and reciprocity. To me, it's the most important word in trade because we've been treated so unfairly by so many nations all over the world that we're changing that.
The new deal features Sunset Clause agreement that would face a sunset in 16 years if it isn't actively renewed or renegotiated. The three countries would meet every 6 years to decide whether to renew the pact. Exchange rate curbs, rules to deter countries from artificially weakening their exchange rates to gain trade advantages. Dispute resolution, systems to hold countries to account when they bend or break trade rules. Tariff reviews and relief, system that allows the country to change US duties and tariffs.
The New Deal promotes more responsible regional commerce in the field of labor and the environment. It drives the creation of more jobs and better salaries to the benefit of workers of the three countries. It grants full certainty to international commerce and investment. It promotes the use of new technologies in business.
There was no agreement that the trade negotiations would turn out this way. In fact, last week, Trump administration signaled that it might leave Canada out of a bilateral trade deal with Mexico that would replace NAFTA. That would have disrupted more than $1 trillion in annual trade that occurs between the three countries. The New Deal has meant relief for different industries and manufacturers. However, agreement still needs to be ratified in respective three nations.
We're not yet at the finish line. This agreement still needs to be ratified in Mexico, in the United States, and in Canada. But what I can say is that free and fair trade in North America, a trading zone that accounts for more than a quarter of the world's economy, with just 7% of its population, is in a much more stable place than it was yesterday. We now have a path forward.
The chalking out of the major trade deal means a victory for Trump. He will be able to say it's another promise kept to his voters right before the midterm elections. It is not a total trade revolution, but USMCA does make substantial changes to modernize trade rules, and it gives some wins to US farmers and blue-collar workers in the auto sector. It was victory of sorts for Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as well, as he didn't cave much on his key issues, dairy and the treaty's dispute resolution mechanism. The effect of the deal on Mexico is something that is still unclear. Experts say with the deal, Trump is emboldened on trade with USMCA, now a playbook of sorts for future trade deals. The US president believes his strategy is working, and he's not likely to go harder after China. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
All right, let's get a perspective on the story. We have with us Mr. Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador, joining us. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us on Rajya Sabha Television. Sir, speaking about the new deal that has been signed, after more than a year of negotiations, this deal has been signed between the US, Mexico and Canada. So how do you look at this deal? Do you think it is more than an updated version of NAFTA?
Well, the Mexicans and the Canadians have been referring to it as NAFTA 2.0.
Yes.
But the fact is that there have been significant changes in NAFTA, and these really have changed the very nature of the trilateral trade relationship between these three countries. Of course, the Mexican president has referred to it as a win-win-win for all three countries. Yes. And the Canadian Prime Minister also called it a victory for Canada. But the fact is that I'm not alone in saying that this is, by and large, a victory for Donald Trump. From the very beginning, during his election campaign itself, he had called for the scrapping of NAFTA.
Yes.
And he has been able to do that. He was very critical of the fact that jobs in the United States had been lost, particularly in what are called the Rust states, extending from western New York State right across to the Midwest. Jobs in the automobile sector. Detroit is virtually a ghost town. There have been huge losses of jobs there. Also in the steel sector and the aluminium sector, there were losses of jobs. And he was very keen to change this situation. I think he's been able to do that because, as your visual showed, there are going to be serious restrictions on the import of automobiles. Yes. From any of the two other countries into the United States. Yes. And these controls will relate to wages of the labor sector, mm-hmm. and environmental controls, also on imports of parts from third countries. For example, not more than 40% of the parts can be made by, or rather 40% of the parts have to be made by labor which is paid at the rate of $16 an hour. Now this will affect Mexico. Yes. Because $16 an hour is closer to the US wage. True. And if Mexican labor is paid at that rate, certainly they'll be better off. But this will encourage US automobile manufacturers to relocate the manufacturing of those parts into the United States. Yes. So it will really end up benefiting the United States. Mm-hmm. There are also restrictions on the percentage of parts which can be imported from other countries. There are lots of automobile parts which were coming to Mexico from China, mm-hmm. and being used in the automobiles which were then exported to the United States. Now there is going to be a severe restriction on that. Mm-hmm. But as a result of all this, the prices of cars are going to go up. Yes. So while it may benefit the labor sector of the automobile industrial sector, but it will adversely impact on the consumer, who will end up paying more for automobiles. Similarly, I think Donald Trump has had his way in regard to steel and aluminium because he has imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico. But these tariffs have not been lifted in the new USMCA agreement. Incidentally, Donald Trump has been very, very emphatic in calling it by its new name, USMCA agreement, and not referring to it as NAFTA 2.0, which is how the Canadian Prime Minister has referred to it. So I think it has been strong-arm tactics from the part of the United States. Donald Trump has emerged the victor. And his base, his political base, which is quite widespread in the Midwest, has been hugely supportive of the deal.
Yes, but the deal still needs to be ratified.
It needs to be ratified. It won't be signed before November. And then there is the process of ratification. In all probability, the ratification will take place only next year. And if there are elections around the corner, in the, it might affect the composition.
What if the Democrats take over the US House
then
of
I think
Senate?
they may not be so supportive. So there are a lot of question marks. But at the moment, he has been able to arm twist the Mexicans and the Canadians, as you showed in the visuals. He first signed a deal with Mexico, and then Canada joined or came on board because it didn't want to be left out. You know, the United States is a much bigger economy than either Mexico or Canada. And it is the #1 export destination for both these two other partners. So they didn't want to lose out on the opportunities through trade which they are getting in the United States. And I think that when Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, said that it's a victory of Canada, what he really meant was that Canada has been able to hang on and retain some of the advantages which it enjoys. You rightly said that there'll be it has a sunset clause. This agreement will only be for 16 years, unlike NAFTA, which didn't have a sunset clause. Now, NAFTA was signed in 1993, 25 years ago. Much has changed. For instance, at that time, the internet didn't play much of a role in the economy. Today, the digital economy is a major factor. And frankly, a lot of changes were necessary, also in regard to intellectual property rights. So it is significant that there is a sunset clause. The new agreement will lapse. It has to be renewed every 6 years to keep updating it. And I think these are all things which the Americans really wanted.
Absolutely. So, of course, this new deal, USMCA, brings about major changes on cars and new policies on labor, environmental standards, intellectual property protections. But the three nations are saying it is a very good deal for all of them. But how will this deal Trump's efforts to isolate Beijing? Well, that is something that we have to wait and watch, and that is to be seen in the days to come. Thank you so much, sir, for joining and sharing your perspective on this entire story. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on to the other big story this week. It has been touted as a game-changer purchase because India is to be the third country in the world to have the Russian-built S-400 Triumph missile system. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin saw the signing of the deal for their supply to India after the two leaders held delegation-level talks on Friday in New Delhi. And with a range of 400 kilometers, the radars of the S-400 system can cover almost the whole of Pakistani airspace and track almost all kinds of aircrafts taking off, flying and landing. The long-range missile systems will tighten India's air defense capabilities along the India-China border and will change the strategic balance in the subcontinent. Here's a report. The induction of the S-400 Triumph Advanced Air Defense Missile System from Russia is set to be a game-changer in the region. The system is already operational in Russia and under induction in China, and India will become the third country in the world to have S-400 Triumph Advanced Air Defense Missile System. So what is S-400 Air Defense Missile System? It is the world's most dangerous operationally deployed modern long-range surface-to-air missile system. It is considered much more effective than the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System or the THAAD developed by the US. It can track 300 types of aerial targets, including manned and unmanned aircrafts, cruise missile and ballistic missiles simultaneously. It can engage all types of aerial targets at a range of up to 400 kilometers. It can engage up to 80 targets at a time. The radars of the system are so sensitive they can even pick targets with a very small radar cross-section like stealth aircrafts, which are virtually impossible for other systems to track. It is thus a mobile system that integrates a multifunction radar, autonomous detection and targeting systems, anti-aircraft missile systems, and a command and control center.
There is actually no equivalent to the S-400. The Americans never produced anything like this because they never needed it. Their air defense systems are completely different. I'm not an expert to say which is better, which is worse, but given the necessities that we were facing, this was the optimal choice we had. I'm sure the US has systems which are better and some that are worse, but given the context in which we are, we have found the optimal solution for our security needs.
The S-400 was made operational in 2007 and is responsible for defending Moscow. It was deployed in Syria in 2015 to guard Russian and Syrian naval and air assets. Units have also been stationed in the Crimean Peninsula. So why does India need it? Well, it is important for India to have the capability to thwart missile attacks from the two likeliest quarters, Pakistan and China. Beijing signed a deal with Moscow in 2015 to buy 6 battalions of the S-400 system.
It will give the technical characteristics of the weapons platform, will be able to give us the confidence that we can, on our borders at least, create no-fly zones, in the sense zones that we can protect against aerial intrusions. So I think in that sense, given the environment around our country, it will be a boost to our confidence and their abilities to deal with adversaries.
However, with the deal, India risks US sanctions under a US law known as Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA, signed by US President Donald Trump in August 2017. America can put sanctions on a country for engaging in a significant transaction with the Russian defense and intelligence sector. However, Washington has previously appeared open to discussing a potential sanctions exemption for India. It remains to be seen how that will play out in days to come. With inputs from Akhilesh Suman, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. And our big story from the Middle East. After parliamentary elections in the month of May that failed to produce a majority, political wrangling is over in Iraq. Iraq's parliament chose a new head of state, President Barham Salih, this week, and he has designated Adil Abdul Mahdi, who is unaffiliated with any party, as the country's new prime minister. Now, both the leaders are widely seen as capable technocrats. The choices suggest that Iraq could finally be edging away from the sect and party-based system that has driven its politics and fomented bloodshed since the American invasion in 2003.
Barham Salih has taken over as the new president of Iraq, a largely ceremonial position. His taking over ends months of deadlock after an inconclusive national election in May. Iraqi parliament elected Saleh with 219 of its 329 lawmakers voting for him. Saleh's party, Patriotic Union of Kurdistan or the PUK, and rival Kurdistan Democratic Party were unable to agree on a candidate, and thus the parliament speaker eventually decided to hold a vote among all the 20 nominees. Under an unofficial agreement dating back to the 2003 US-led invasion, Iraq's presidency is held by a Kurd, while the Prime Minister is Shiite and the Parliament Speaker is Sunni. The new president, who is an urbane, British-educated politician, is seen as a moderate Kurdish figure who favors maintaining strong relations with both the United States and Iran, while promoting Kurdish interests through cooperation with Iraq's central government rather than confrontation.
I swear by God Almighty to carry out my legal duties and responsibilities with dedication and devotion, and to preserve the independence and sovereignty of Iraq, and to look after the interest of its people.
Within an hour of Iraq's parliament electing him, Saleh announced that he had asked former oil minister Abdul Mahdi to form the next government. Abdul Mahdi is an independent, not allied with either of the two Shiite-led blocs that each claim to have the most support after May's elections. Of the two blocs that emerged after the May elections, one is led by the current Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, and the other bloc includes state-sanctioned militia, many of which are backed by Iran. But snubbing both the blocs, Mahdi was chosen. The Prime Minister-designate will have 30 days to submit his cabinet to Parliament. The May parliamentary elections were evidence of frustration among the Iraqi people, with voter turnout at its lowest since the toppling of Saddam Hussein. The change in guard has brought in hope. However, Iran and the US's competition for influence over Baghdad continues. The White House has warned Iran that it would hold Tehran accountable for any attacks against US facilities in Iraq.
Iran is the origin of the current threat to Americans in Iraq. It is to blame for the attacks against our mission in Basra and our embassy in Baghdad. I also warn the Iranian government that we will hold it directly responsible for any harm to Americans or our diplomatic facilities, whether perpetrated by Iranian forces or by associated proxies or elements of those militias.
The new Iraqi government will take over a country facing enormous challenges following a war against the Islamic State that caused billions of dollars in damage, left millions of people displaced, and put a massive strain on Iraq's oil-dependent economy. The government will also have to address a persistent protest movement in Iraq's Shiite heartland over poor public services and previous Haider al-Abadi government's corruption. The protests helped shake up the traditional sectarian alliances that had previously seen Shiites, Sunnis and Kurds fighting it out for shares of state power. This year, lawmakers crossed sectarian lines to forge blocs that claimed a nationalist mantle that bodes well for the Middle Eastern country. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And more than 1,500 people are dead and over 2,500 injured after the 7.5 magnitude tremor and tsunami in Indonesia on 28th of September. While rescuers continue to comb through the ruins of destroyed buildings, hope is fading that anyone will be found alive under the rubble now. Meanwhile, after days of delays, international aid has finally started to pour in the disaster zone, where the United Nations has said almost 2 lakh people are still in need of humanitarian assistance.
A 7.5 magnitude quake struck just off the central island of Sulawesi, setting off a tsunami that engulfed the coastal city of Palu on September 28th. The quake brought down hotels, shopping malls and thousands of houses in Palu, while tsunami waves as high as 20 feet scoured its beachfront shortly afterwards. More than 66,000 homes were reportedly destroyed or damaged by the quake and the tsunami. According to Sulawesi's Voz, the Saputan volcano in the north of the island, about 600 km northeast of Palu, erupted on Wednesday, but there were no reports of any casualties or damage. But concerns is growing about conditions in remote areas, many of which have been cut off by destroyed road, landslides and downed bridges. According to Indonesia's disaster agency, faulty alarms failed to alert people about the oncoming danger of a tsunami triggered by the earthquake.
I was at home when the earthquake happened, and it shook me so strongly that it was difficult for us to walk. We saw the walls outside fall amid the quake.
I have never experienced such a strong quake in Palu before. I was born here in 1966 and there has never been such a strong earthquake before. There were only smaller quakes.
Across Palu, blocked roads, a partially closed airport and break-in telecommunications have made it difficult to bring help in the affected area and impossible to contact more remote regions. With hospitals damaged, injured people have been treated in the open and at least one military field hospital has been set up. The military has taken over the airport to fly aid in and injured people and other evacuees out. The National Disaster Agency has said tents, food, water and sanitation facilities for more than 60,000 displaced people are in short supply. As tensions and need run high, police have begun guarding shops against looters. Meanwhile, Indonesia's President Joko Widodo also made a second visit to Sulawesi Island on Wednesday to ramp up relief efforts.
The most important thing is I've sent a message to the governor and the regent for economic activity to restart so that they can start heading back to normal day-to-day life while evacuation continues to be carried out and for the next stage of rehabilitation and reconstruction to be done. But the most important thing is that economic activity must be restarted.
According to the UN's humanitarian office, almost 2 lakh people need urgent help, among them tens of thousands of children. Meanwhile, international efforts to help survivors of the Indonesia's devastating earthquake and tsunami have gathered pace. Indian Navy has diverted 3 ships to help tsunami-hit Indonesia for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operation. US has provided initial funding, deployed government disaster experts. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies said it was appealing for $22 million to help Indonesia. In all, about 20 countries have offered help. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And finally, Beijing on 1st of October celebrated the 69th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China with pomp and pageantry. More than 2,000 volunteers gathered in Xi'an to sing Ode to the Motherland, a popular patriotic song, while farmers organized a sports competition to celebrate their National Day. A dazzling light show was also held through the week. So here are a few glimpses of the celebration in China. As we take your leave, we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for your time.